pressing the button. Let's see. Okay. Sarah?
All right.
You want to you want to test the screen share to see first?
Oh yeah, let's do that. It says host disabled, participant sharing.
Oh, wait, yes, sorry. Okay.
Okay, so that's not full screen.
I don't see anything. Okay, now I see it. It's not full screen though.
Is it full screen now?
No.
No. Sorry, I'm gonna try again. Okay, how about now? No?
Yes.
Okay, it's full screen?
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
Okay. So it's 11:01. We'll start right now. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Hamza Reed. I am the Director of Operations at the Multicultural Center. And I'd like to welcome you all to our Family First Center weekly webinar. This webinar happens every Wednesday at 11 o'clock. The format will consist of a short presentation followed by a question and answer session at the end, where we will field questions from the audience down in the chat box below. Today's exciting topic is showing up for your child, and will be presented by Sister Sarah Radwan. A little bit about Sister Sarah. She's currently working on her master's in clinical mental health counseling. She has experience working at the Trauma and Grief Center here at the Texas Children's Hospital. And she's working, or has worked with children and adolescents as a mentor and a youth leader for more than 5 years. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Sister Sarah.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for showing up to this presentation. Hope you like this pun. It's always great to be back here to be a part of the Wednesday sessions, talking about mental health topic or just a way that we can better our lives and better our connection with our kids. That's very important. So the topic of today, like Hamza said, is showing up for your child. Showing up kind of sounds like a kind of vague general term, but I'm sure you kind of get the gist of it. Showing up meaning connecting with your child, knowing who they are, understanding who they are, and really helping them, have a secure attachment to you. And so I really love this topic because I feel like, sometimes there's a disconnect between parents and children, right? So parents think they know their child very well. They think that their child has a strong attachment to them, when if you talk to the children or the teenagers, they actually don't feel that close to their parents. And so we want to really bridge that gap. We want to make parents and children, be close to each other, be attached to each other, because that's how we create secure children. And so I mentioned this in my last presentation, but if you weren't there, I'll repeat it. There's been so many studies on what creates secure children. And so what we know through all these studies is that every child who winds up doing well in their life, whether it's emotionally, whether it's in terms of their academic success, their leadership skills, and I would even say, in terms of their connection to their religion, they've had at least one stable and committed relationship with a supportive adult. Did my slide not go next?
No, it didn't. It didn't go next. There
it did, right? It's good now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yes. So like I said, so based on all the studies, they found out that one of the best scientific predictors of how a child turns out successfully is whether they have a stable and committed relationship with one adult. Now we know ideally we want that to be a parent or even both parents. That would be like the best case scenario. And so what does it mean to actually, be there? How could an adult actually be there consistently for their child? That's what we're going to be talking about in the presentation, inshallah. And so most of the material that I got from my presentation about showing up for your children and what you can do consistently is from this book. It's by Daniel Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson. It's called The Power of Showing Up: How Parental Presence Shapes Who Our Kids Become and How Their Brains Get Wired. So what they basically did is they looked through their research, they looked through different studies on, what makes kids successful? What do parents do that helps make their kids successful? And what they found is that if parents instill these 4 S's, which we're going to discuss more in detail, if they instill the 4 S's of helping their child feel safe, helping their child feel seen, soothed, that's what creates secure children who end up thriving in their life. And so inshallah, I want to kind of take a deep dive into each of the S's, so safe, seen, soothed, and secure. And how we're going to discuss it is we're first going to be talking about, what it means to help a child feel safe. Then we're going to talk about what are ways that us parents, how can we make our children not feel safe or not feel seen, not feel soothed? And then we're lastly going to say, okay, what can we start doing from today to help instill those S's? And the great thing about these S's, these 4 S's, is that it's not late. Even if you might have had moments where you didn't make your child feel safe or seen or soothed, it's never too late to start to help build that secure relationship with your child and to show up for them consistently. Now, before we dive into the S's, we have to kind of do some deep work on ourselves first. And that's the great thing about parenting or about being in a role where you're working with kids, is that you have to do a lot of self-reflection and kind of make sense of your own past and your own story before you're able to, be that mentor, be that, be the person that shows up for your children. So my question to you is, have you reflected on your early life experiences and how you were parented? Have you reflected really on your childhood story? And this doesn't just mean like kind of snippets of reflection, like, oh yeah, my parents kind of treated me that way, I didn't like that, or my parents traumatized me that way, or my parents were great at that. Actually kind of making sense of your full childhood and kind of making it into something coherent. Because what we know is that, parents who show up by, consistently providing the 4 S's to their children, making them safe, seen, soothed, and secure, these parents have reflected on and made sense of their own childhood story and attachment history. Now it gets a little tricky and it's a little tough to do that, obviously, kind of thinking of our past. But what we know is that without a coherent narrative, if we're not really able to make sense of our childhood story of how our parents raised us, then we're likely to repeat the same mistakes that our parents made, passing down, the painful legacies, the painful moments that they learned from their own parents. We know that our parents weren't perfect, right? Our parents, they did the best that they could, but there are some things they might have done that were mistakes or things that might have hurt us in some way and kind of made us who we are today. But if we're not able to kind of reflect on that and build that narrative, then we might, accidentally be repeating the cycle of mistakes without realizing it. And so the goal is that when we're able to make sense of our experiences and we work on comprehending our parents' own, traumas and hurt, we can break the cycle, we can heal from the past wounds and avoid passing it to our children. So I hope that makes sense, but I'll give you like a quick example. If I'm a person, for example, who was raised by 2 parents, and let's say, my dad, this is not real, I'm just giving an example. Let's say my father was very, not really the most, he didn't really like showing emotion, and he didn't really like when his kids showed emotion. So anytime, we'd talk to him about something, he would kind of like block us off, not really connect, not be the most supportive, not be the most encouraging. And that's kind of like how I was raised. That's just how my childhood was. Now, let's say I didn't really reflect much on that story. I didn't make sense of it. I didn't heal from it. And so I get older, I have my own children. And I noticed that every time my child starts to, come to me with some emotions, or they're not feeling good, or they're bringing up some feelings, I start to feel uncomfortable myself, because I was kind of programmed that, emotions, we should not show our emotions. We should keep our emotions to ourselves. And so now my child is doing that. And so it makes me uncomfortable, and I almost want to shut down their own emotions. Now that's what happens if we haven't really reflected on our childhood story. If on the other hand, I kind of made, I took the time, did some, deep digging into my own childhood, and I kind of, looked at how my dad was raised. Not only am I thinking of what my dad, how he raised me, but also I wonder how my dad was raised. And I come up with a story that, hey, my dad, he was the only man from the only boy from his like 5 sisters. His dad, passed away. He didn't really have someone, like being close to him or connecting with him. And so obviously he couldn't really show emotions, because he was, quote unquote, the man of the house. He couldn't really show emotions as a man. So that's how he was raised, and that's why he raised me in that way. And that's why I feel uncomfortable when my child is showing emotion or whatever it is. So when we're able to kind of make sense of that, we're able to kind of heal from that, maybe even forgive our parents for the mistakes that they've done. And then we make sure that we don't pass it on to our child and to our children. And so the best part of this is that, our history is, the best part is that our childhood history is not our destiny. When we're able to make sense of our own story, then we can be the kind of parent we want to be, because now we know, what things, how your parents raised you in the best ways and what mistakes they made. And now that you've made sense of it, you can be the kind of parent that you want to be moving forward, regardless of how we were parented. Whether we've had, a traumatic childhood, which some children have, whether we've had supportive or unsupportive parents, we can then choose what kind of parent we want to be. But it first takes a lot of work from us ourselves to have that inner reflection, to kind of go ask those questions. How was I raised? What did I like that my parents did? Why am I who I am? And what can I do to make sure that I want to parent in the way that, that makes me parent in a positive way, rather than just repeating the same mistake, the same cycle. And there's a really good book. I haven't read it yet, but I've heard really good things about it. And it's on my reading list. It's called Parenting from the Inside Out. It's also by Daniel Siegel, who wrote the book that where I'm getting this information from, where he kind of takes you through the steps of like kind of reflecting on that childhood story of yours, figuring out, why you are who you are, and then how you could end up parenting, from the inside, starting from the inside out. And then you're able to kind of give your kids what you didn't have from your parents, or just, positive parenting moments. So that's a good suggestion. Okay, I hope this wasn't like too like all over the place or too deep, and I hope inshallah it makes sense. But now that we've, kind of did our own reflection, made sense of our story, now let's figure out how we could show up to our kids with the 4 S's. The first S is helping our child feel safe. Now, when we think of the term safety, usually we think of like physical safety, making sure my children wear their seatbelt, they're not going out late at night, we're just kind of keeping them safe physically, which that of course is very true. We have to make sure we keep our kids physically safe, but we also have to make sure our kids feel emotionally safe and relationally safe, which means that they feel safe at home and also with the relationships that they have with those around them. And I mean, it's very unfortunate, but we know that a lot of times children who have trauma, who've had some childhood trauma, it usually has to do with, some family member or some relative that made them feel unsafe in some way, whether it had to do with like physical abuse, sexual abuse, or just emotional abuse, which it's usually the most common type of abuse. That a lot of times starts from the home. It's not just like something random that, your child experiences outside. A lot of times it starts from the home. So our job as parents is twofold. Our first job is to protect our kids from harm, obviously, as much as we can, we protect them from harm. And the second is to avoid becoming the source of fear and threat. So a lot of times we focus on the first, our main job, we want to keep our kids safe, but we don't realize that there are moments where we could actually be the source of fear, the source of anxiety to our children. And that's honestly very, very hard, to think about, because we don't want to be the source of fear for our kids. We want to be the source of, of love and care. We want them to feel close to us and not feel afraid from us. And so the goal when we're, helping our children be safe is helping them feel safe as well, because that is really the core of the attachment. Why safety is, talked about first is because that really lays the attachment, lays the foundation of how a child ends up becoming. If they kind of start with a rocky foundation in terms of their safety, they don't feel safe at home, they don't feel safe with their parents, then all the other 3 S's, which is, helping them feel soothed and seen, it's going to come from like a rocky foundation because they don't feel safe. So safety is really the number one, it's what lays the foundation for a secure child, is them feeling safe in their own home, them feeling safe with their parents. Now, what are some of the ways that we can make our kids feel unsafe at home? The first way I would say is, exposure to scary parental conflict. Now, we are in October, which is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So this of course is kind of taking it not to the extreme, but I mean, domestic violence, it is very rampant in our society. Even in Muslim households, domestic violence is it happens, unfortunately, and it has to be talked about more. And so when kids actually see, their parents, whether it's domestic violence or whether it's just them having, aggressive discussions or aggressive, they're fighting, they're arguing, maybe even name calling, and it could even lead to that domestic violence, that actually helps the child feel, that makes the child feel unsafe. Even if that conflict isn't going to the child, them just getting exposed to it triggers their stress response. And when they constantly have that stress response triggered, then they will not feel safe, even in their own home, even if their parents love them, even if their parents are loving towards them, but they're not loving towards each other and they're fighting consistently in front of each other, arguing, calling each other names, that makes a child feel unsafe as well. And the second way we can make our child feel unsafe is by becoming scary ourselves. This also relates, the extreme example I would say is like child abuse, but I'm saying more of the general average. What you see in most households is, yelling, screaming, threatening, parents kind of like humiliating their child, making them feel really bad, or even just showing like scary facial expressions. We don't realize, but these moments of, fear in the child can actually make them feel unsafe, especially at the times where we're very angry and we're kind of like overreacting or being like aggressive. This doesn't mean obviously that we're yelling is going to traumatize your child, but once it gets to the point where it's like consistently, yelling and, using derogatory terms or even making dua against your child, things like that actually do happen, that can make your children like feel unsafe at home as well. And then we have introduction to inappropriate images and ideas that can also make your children feel unsafe. That doesn't mean that you're going and giving your child, a picture or something that is inappropriate or that they shouldn't be looking at. But that means that if we're not really giving our children boundaries and setting rules when it comes to their, their smartphone usage or their iPad or what they're watching on TV, what they're watching on YouTube, then they could actually be looking at inappropriate things that make them feel unsafe. And they're not, and a lot of times they're not really, unless we have a close relationship with them, they're not really going to tell us this, this happened because they already feel unsafe with what they're looking at because there's no boundaries. And I think, I think we're all changing for the better in terms of our parenting, but I still think that sometimes as parents, we give our kids like these smart devices and we have no idea what they're really doing on them. Or maybe we have some we have some security controls on them. But for example, like there's some parents who say like, I have no idea like what TikTok is, like it's just like a bunch of videos that people watch, or Snapchat, they just have these filters, but they don't even have the app themselves. And so the first thing, as parents, when it comes to smart devices, I have like a whole rant on this. Maybe I'll do a presentation on it because our phones have made us, just crazy. But anyways, as a parent, if you are giving your child a smart device or any device that has applications, you should have the same exact apps that your children have. And you should know what they're doing on these apps. And you should be scrolling through those apps. And then you could decide as a parent, what boundaries to instill if you think your child should even be on these apps and, actually look at what they're doing on these apps. So the excuse that like, I don't really know what it is, I looked at it once, that should not be an excuse like at all. We should be looking at these apps like as much as our kids do. So we could see what they're actually getting introduced to. Okay, rant over. Okay, and then the last thing that we could help that we can do to make our children feel unsafe is, by humiliating, shaming, or yelling reactively. I kind of talked about that. This is more of like, just the belittling of our children, making them feel bad in front of their siblings. It's also kind of like embarrassing when you're kind of shaming them in front of publicly, or even shaming them when they're outside in front of their friends or whatever the case may be. Okay, so now we said how we can make our children feel unsafe. Let's talk about overprotecting. So a lot of times we want our children to be super safe that we start to shelter them and we overprotect them so much. And that's also not the answer. So sometimes we're so worried that something bad will happen to our children that we manage our own fears, our own anxieties by like sheltering our children. They can't do anything. So instead of like letting them do everything, which is one extreme, we go to the extreme opposite and we like kind of keep them at home, They aren't allowed to do anything. We don't even want them to struggle with anything because we're so overprotective. We want to make sure everything comes like easy for them because we're their parents. We love them. But what we know, through research and through life is that kids, they can handle appropriate freedom and challenges. They can handle freedom, appropriate freedom with our boundaries, of course, and they can handle challenges. And they know that we're there to encourage them with the challenge, any challenge that they experience. And so as a parent, we have to kind of figure out what our kids need when situations do come up. Do they need a push-in or do they need a cushion? So, something might come up where your child just really needs a push from you. They might kind of tell you that like, hey, I'm like struggling with something. And you as a parent, your first instinct is to protect and to help. But at that time, they might just need some encouragement and some push-in from you so that they could become resilient and overcome that obstacle. But at other times, your kids, they might not really have the capacity to deal with what they're, going through. So at that time, they might need a cushion. They just kind of need your comfort. They need you to console them and to just be there for them during that time. So you as a parent, you have to kind of figure out what your child needs at the time. Okay, now what are some ways that we can do to help our child feel safe? The number one thing that you could do is to make a commitment with yourself and with your partner or the caregiver who's also taking care of the child that you won't be the source of fear in your home, right? So whether that has to do with like not yelling aggressively, no threatening, no humiliating, no overreacting, no obviously abuse in any way is never gonna happen, or even making certain scary facial expressions, making a commitment that you won't be that source of fear for your child. And how do you do that? By having really a lot of self-awareness, kind of noticing how you react to things or how you overreact to things, or even asking your partner or you're even asking your kids, do you ever feel afraid of me when we're having, an argument or when I'm upset by you with something, and having them tell you like honestly, like, yeah, sometimes you make this face, or sometimes you call me stupid or you call me names and that really hurts me, that really bothers me. So kind of being self-aware and making a commitment that you're not going to be the source of fear in your home. And then secondly is repair. So unfortunately, even if we make that commitment, we're human, we're going to make mistakes. We're not going to be perfect parents. But if we're able to repair as soon as we can, then we're able to really, bridge that relationship once again. And so how do you repair the relationship? By apologizing, laughing, being normal. And so when you do that constantly, anytime there is a breach in that relationship, you apologize, you repair, and you be normal. This will communicate with your child, things may get tough between us, but you will never lose my love. I will be there for you always, and no matter what, even when things get difficult. And I know at times, parents might feel weird about apologizing. It could be just like a back home kind of mentality, no offense. But they might feel like, apologizing to their child will kind of make their child respect them less, or will make them like feel like they're not really my parent, or, they're not my authority figure anymore because they're apologizing. But it's actually the complete opposite. If we as parents, whenever we make a mistake, we apologize to our children, they're going to respect us more. They're going to actually it's going to increase the love between us. And they're also going to learn like valuable lessons. They're going to learn that, our parents aren't perfect. They're going to learn how to apologize when they make mistakes. And they're also going to learn, what should I do whenever, someone that I love or I care about is not acting the best way? How should I handle, what should be my response? So you're teaching them valuable lessons when you are apologizing whenever you make a mistake. Obviously, we want to minimize those mistakes as much as possible, but they're bound to happen. Okay, the last thing that we could do to make our kids feel safe is be the safe harbor that your kids can run to. And how do you do that? How could you be that person that really your kids feel safe and they kind of, whenever they leave, they come back to you because they just feel safety and comfort from you? By having like reflective conversations with them and acknowledging uncomfortable states. Whenever you see that they're afraid of something, maybe they're about to, learn how to ride a bike, or they're about to do something for the first time and they're scared. They're about to go for an interview when they're older, whatever it is. When you acknowledge their state and talk to them about it, then they know that it's okay for them to be afraid and go to you with it. They're not going to feel like you're blocking their fear or just kind of minimizing their fear. You're actually talking to them about it. You're acknowledging it. And then you could be that safe harbor that offers them the comforting words, that offers them a hug, that offers them the cushion that they need. Okay, so those are the 3 ways that we can start doing to really help our children and our child feel safe at home and with us. Now we're going to do the second S, and then I'll be done. I know I've been talking so much, which is helping our child feel seen. Okay, so we talked about safety, which is the core, the foundation. Now we're going to talk about the second S, which is helping our child feel seen. So my question to you is, how good are you at seeing your kids, really seeing them for who they are? So as parents, we like to think, and we feel like we know our kids really well because we've raised them from when they were little babies until however age they are now. So we feel like we really, really know them well. But unfortunately, if we kind of flip the table and we ask the kids, do you feel like your parents know you well? And maybe this is more when they're older. A lot of times they'll be like this little boy right here. He's like, they don't really get me at all. And as parents, it's kind of shocking to us because we feel like we know our kids, but usually what we know from our children is like things on like the external. We see their actions, we see what they do, but we don't really dive deep into what's going on beneath the behavior. So seeing our children means focusing less on a child's specific behavior or external action and more on what's happening beneath the behavior, more what's happening in their feelings and their thoughts, rather on just what they're doing that is wrong. Usually, they're misbehaving. That's what we see externally, but we're not really diving deep to see like, okay, what could be the reason? What's happening beneath that behavior? And so whenever we help our children feel seen, we give them the experience of being seen, they can also learn how to see themselves with clarity and honesty. Because if I'm a parent and I notice my child doing something, and rather than immediately reacting and trying to correct their behavior, I try to figure out what's going on beneath the behavior, and I let them know, like, oh, it looks like you're upset because of this, or it looks like you're mad, or it looks like you're this. Then they start to kind of have these words going in their mind, like, oh, I'm acting this way because I'm sad. Let me go do something to help me feel better. So they're able to see themselves with clarity and honesty too. And we want that for our children because that helps create a healthy development in them. Now, what are some things that we can do that makes our children not feel seen, right? So what can we do as parents that makes our child feel like we don't really get them? The first way is that we see our children through the lens that has more to do with our own desires and fears and issues rather than with our children's personality, passions, and behavior. So when we look at our children and if they're doing something we don't like, if they're making mistakes, if they're misbehaving, we're kind of seeing it through our lens, like, oh my God, like what is this child going to become? They're not going to become, successful. Like personality, like, okay, we know negatively labeling them is like obviously off limits. We don't call them stupid. We don't call them lazy. We don't call them issues like that, like words like that. But even labeling them things that are positive sometimes also, causes them to get stressed out a little bit. Like if you always label your child, oh, I know you won't do that because you're a good girl or you're a good boy. I know you won't do that because you're very smart or you're very smart. When these labels kind of get so ingrained in our children that they feel like if they, if they do something that goes against the label, then there's something wrong with them. And that also kind of affects their development. But we're talking here more about like negative labels. So like calling them like lazy or stupid, just because we're kind of like assuming, we have our own assumptions or judgments about them, and we label them right away instead of really looking beneath the surface and asking ourselves what's going on with them. Like what could actually be going on? Are they lazy? Is my child lazy? Or could it be that they didn't sleep well last night because they were on their phones? Or could it be that, they're really not interested in this class, or because it's a difficult class? There could be a million reasons, right? Rather than just assuming and judging and placing a label on them. Another way that we can make our children feel not seen is by also denying their feelings or even belittling their feelings. Like if they come to us with something, they're upset over something that we think is like ridiculous. Like, why are you upset over that? But obviously we're not going to tell them that. But sometimes we'll be like, no, you shouldn't feel upset over that. Like, no, this is not a big deal. When we kind of like deny those feelings or belittle them or just kind of, say that they're not really a big deal, it makes our children not want to come to us with, with other feelings or other emotions or other experiences that they're going through, because we're kind of denying what they're going through. We're like telling them you shouldn't be feeling this way, which means that we're not valuing, what they're telling us. And we could also be making them feel not seen by blaming or shaming them. Like if they tell us, even a mistake that they've made or something that happened, and we automatically blame them, like, oh, you shouldn't have done that. Like, see, this is what happens when you don't do this. See, this is what happens when this happens. Or we shame them, we make them feel like very, very guilty for what they've done. Then that makes our children feel like we don't really get them. We don't really see them like as a whole person that has, good, and that has, that makes mistakes, and that also is a good person as well. And this becomes especially, it causes a disconnect when the child gets older, because as our kids get older developmentally, they become more private, right? They want to kind of be independent from their parents. And so if they come to us, with little, in little moments, they come to us and they tell us about something they're going through, something they're feeling, and our automatic response is to deny that feeling or belittle it, or we blame them or we shame them, then they're going to stop coming to us and they're really going to stop showing us who they really are. And we don't want that to happen. We don't want that disconnect to happen with our kids, and especially with our teenagers who are going to be going through so many things as they get older. Now, what are some things that we can do to help our child feel seen? Number one is to be a stress detective. Okay, so we need to put on our detective hats and to be curious, try to figure out what's actually going on with our child that's making them misbehave or that's making them do something that we don't want them to do. So instead of immediately judging or assuming, we need to be curious and consider what's going on beneath the external, beneath what we're seeing, beneath the action. And so how could we do that? Ask yourself, why is my child doing that? Instead of immediately correcting the behavior or, lashing out or getting angry or getting upset, kind of pause for a second and just think, why could my child be doing that? Is he upset by something? Does he feel like he needs to, show off in front of his friends? Is she feeling insecure? Is she tired? Is she hungry? There could be a million reasons for why our children are doing something that we don't want them to do. And we know that our children are not evil, right? They're not just trying to make us mad and, just be these evil little tiny creatures. No, a lot of times they do the things they do because of like multiple reasons. So if we're curious, we become stress detectives. We could figure out that reason and help them overcome those obstacles that are getting in the way of the action we want them to do. And the benefit of that is whenever we do find the why behind the action, it becomes a lot easier to, set boundaries or discipline our kids. Because if we kind of are looking at the external action and we automatically discipline, we automatically just try to fix the problem is probably going to come back up again and again because we didn't really get to the why behind why our child is doing that. But if I know the why, then I'm able to kind of like figure out what to do next, whether it's setting a boundary, whether it's disciplining, whether it's teaching, whatever it is the case may be. And if you see this example on this picture on the left, I'll kind of describe it in case you're not looking at the video. But there's like a mom and she's with her toddler and he kind of has food all over the place and he's throwing food everywhere. And so, instead of immediately assuming and judging, so she's kind of thinking she's upset. She's like, oh, he's doing this to get a rise out of me. He's doing this so I could be mad. Instead of immediately assuming and judging, be curious and take a deeper dive. So she takes a second and then she changes her thoughts instead. So, I wonder why he's doing that. What's going on inside his mind? Why is my child throwing food all over the place? Could it be that, he wants to see different colors splatter everywhere? Could it be that he's not really interested in the food? Why is my child doing that? Now, once she knows the why, she's able to, figure out the next step to take. And she's also not so upset and so bothered by the action. Okay, so that's number one, be a stress detective. Number two is to create a space and time to really better know your child and understand them at a deeper level. So we might know like everything that's going on with our children's life externally. We know what they're, how they're doing at their homework. We know who their friends are. We know what classes they're taking. We know all these things, but we don't really know what's going on internally. We want to really know our children like whole, like inside out. We want to know everything about them because we're their parents, right? We want to make them feel seen. So instead of instead of asking our children like very vague questions, like, how was your day? Like stop asking how was your day because you already know what the answer is going to be. Try to have like a few minutes a day, like 5 or 10 minutes where you sit with your child and ask them like more precise and deeper questions. We're not saying, talk about, what's wrong with the Muslim Ummah, what's going on with Trump, or just like big conversations. We're saying like little things like, what was something that made you feel like happy today? Or what was, did something happen with your friend that made you feel upset? Like ask them questions where you're able to really dig deep, know more about their thoughts, about their feelings, about how they see the world. And I always feel like before bedtime is like the best time to kind of get your kids to say things because, at nighttime, people are just deeper and more reflective and, they confess more things. So maybe if once you're putting your kids to bed, like 5-10 minutes, ask them just like a few questions. It doesn't have to be a long conversation. That kind of gets them to go, more deep rather than just like external superficial questions. And I think doing that will really help you feel closer to your child and it will help them feel seen too, because then they know that you actually care about those deeper questions too. Okay, that's all I have today, but just as a quick recap of what we talked about, we talked about showing up for your child and how, one of the biggest predictors of how a child turns out successfully is whether they have a supportive adult who's always there for them, showing up for them in their life. And we could show up by consistently showing the 4 S's. We said helping our child feel safe, seen, soothed, and that helps them become secure. We talked today just about being safe and seen, but before we're able to instill those things in our children, we have to really make sense of our own story. We have to make sense of how our childhood was, of how we were parented. And once we're able to make sense of our story, we can be the kind of parent that we want to be, regardless of how we were parented. So then we talked about helping our child feel seen, which is our goal as parents is to protect our children from harm and to avoid being the source of harm. And we do that by making a commitment to ourselves and to our partner that we're not going to be, threatening, yelling, demeaning to our children. We're not going to make them feel afraid in their own home. And then we also know that, at times that commitment might be broken because we're human, but we're going to repair. We're going to apologize to our child, try to laugh with them, make things normal. And if we do that consistently, that makes our child feel safe at their home and makes their child feel safe with us. And then we talked about helping our children feel seen, which means that we're not just looking at what our children are doing externally, but we're looking really underneath the behavior. We ask ourselves when we see something that we don't like that our child is doing, we ask ourselves, why is my child doing that? And we know that when we do that consistently, then we're able to really, instead of assuming and judging and kind of, seeing things through our own lens, we're really able to actually figure out who our child is because we're uncovering the why behind their behavior. And then we're able to take that action, whether it's, disciplining, whether it's setting boundaries, whether it's taking away obstacles that are, that are in the way of them being the type of child that they want to be. And then lastly, we said, creating the space and time to get to know your child better, whether it's 5 or 10 minutes in a day, or even less, even a few minutes where you're asking your children questions, preferably when, you're alone, where it's a moment where you guys are feeling connected, asking them questions that just are not superficial, that are more, asking them about their thoughts and feelings about things, asking them about their experiences. And that will also help you get to know them and help them feel seen by you. And that is all that I have today. And inshallah, the next time we'll talk about helping your child feel soothed and helping them become secure. And we'll kind of wrap it up then. But that is all. The second round open to any questions.
So that was the 3 C's. You did 3 C's.
I did 2 S's.
Oh, S's. I'm sorry. Oh, 2 S's. You're missing 3, right?
Yeah, we said safe and seen, and then there is soothed and secure.
Oh, there's 4? Oh.
There is 4, yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Okay. Alhamdulillah. Thank you, Sister Sarah, for that informative presentation. And now we will begin the question and answer session of our webinar. So if you have any questions for Sister Sarah, please text them in the chat box below, whether it's the Zoom or the Facebook. I have some questions. So how can a parent show up for their child when they struggle to show up for themselves?
Okay, I know last time I kept saying that's a very good question. That is a very good question.
It's okay. It's okay.
And honestly, that's it's very important because you're right. We have to show up for ourselves before, so that we're able to show up for our kids like sincerely and be able to do that. And actually, in the book, I didn't really talk about it because it goes into depth. But what I like about this book, I would really recommend for everyone to get it. The Power of Showing Up, the one I mentioned, it is after every chapter, it talks about showing up for yourself. Because as parents, as caregivers, as whatever capacity we're in, we have to really be able to be there for ourselves and know ourselves, know our triggers, know all these different factors so that we're able to know how to parent, right? Because we know that our past kind of predicts our future. That's if we didn't reflect on our past. That's if we don't really know who we are and how we became to who we become, how we are today in the present. But once we know our past, once we're able to figure out our past, then we're able to really show up for ourselves more because I know what I need and I know who I am. Then I'm able to figure out how I want to parent and how to break that cycle of trauma or whatever the painful trauma that happened to us in the past, how to break that cycle. So yes. Yeah, we have to show up for ourselves first.
That's good. No, that's good. That's good, Sister Sarah. You spoke about making your child feel safe as a part of showing up for your children. How can parents do this without feeling that they're being overbearing?
Without feeling helping our child feel safe?
Yeah, how you can cross that line with just constantly asking your child questions and everything else, and the child becomes standoffish because they're thinking that you're being kind of nosy and things like that. So how can you do a good balance of both, basically?
So definitely, like, everything, of course, is in moderation, and that's why in the safety slides, I even had a slide about overprotecting. Like, overprotecting is not the answer. Overbearing is not the answer in terms of helping your child feel safe. But what we do regularly in terms of, like, when situations come up, tense situations come up, when we don't overreact, when we, we're calm, when we don't yell at our children, we're not obviously abusive towards them. Those moments are what help your child feel safe. Overbearing obviously does not make your child feel safe. They're just going to feel like you said, that's overbearing, like you're a helicopter parent. We don't also want to do that, but it's the little moments like these that we make sure that we're not, being mean and aggressive to our children. We make sure that we're not, we're setting boundaries when it comes to the things that they do. We're giving them freedom, but we're also not, we're not gonna, I guess you're right. In terms of overbearing, I could imagine like a parent who's like very worried about the safety of their child. So like anything that their child does, they're kind of like there, or like they're in any place the child goes, they're like kind of watching them. So that's where I guess it comes more with, it comes more with yourself, which is like, why am I so worried and overprotective of my child? Is it because I'm actually worried something might happen to my child, or is it because of my own anxieties and my own fears that, something bad may happen to my kid? Does it actually have to do with your child because you don't trust them, or does it have to do with yourself because of your anxieties and worries? So it is more of like a work on yourself first to make sure that you're not putting your worries on your child. And then I would say afterward is just kind of setting like a balance. Like, I'm going to give my children freedom, but obviously there's going to be boundaries and there's going to be rules. I'm not just going to go the complete opposite, just let them do whatever they want, but I'm also going to give them their appropriate freedom with the boundaries and with the support from me.
Very good. In this time of COVID-19, when families are spending more time together, how can you shield your child from intense arguments between you and your spouse?
That's pretty good. That's a good one. I mean, go in your room. I would say like you're right, because like arguments, it's not like they usually like you don't come out and then argue. Usually they just start.
It happened.
Random moments.
Exactly.
It's okay, obviously, if we're arguing and then we kind of like we make up in that argument, as long as it doesn't, once it starts like getting to a point where there's like yelling, or it's like becoming aggressive, or it's becoming it gets like more than it needs to be, I would say to take it, go somewhere else and take it and, finish your argument in the room before you like go back to your kids. And then you could even like tell your kids like, oh, I know you heard us arguing, but we actually, we talked about it and now we're good. And, this is normal. Sometimes you argue, sometimes, and then you make up. But I would say that if it's like constant, I think that really doesn't like, it really affects the kid negatively if they always see their parents arguing. And it doesn't set like a good example for how a relationship should be. So I would say keep it as like private as possible. If it's just random, like, small arguments here and there, that's okay. And like showing them that you are making up is an excellent way for them to learn that. But if it becomes like, it kind of gets dragged out, it gets more aggressive than it should, then I would say keep it in your room, keep it somewhere private. And make a commitment with your spouse, like that's what we're gonna do. Because they at the time, it's gonna be hard to be like, hey, let's go. Beforehand, you should be like, hey, if we're fighting, let's go in the room and then we'll come out afterwards.
So try to come up with a plan.
Yes, beforehand, for sure. Yeah.
How can you show up for your children when your spouse is having difficulties showing or acknowledging their own emotion?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's a very common issue in like a lot of households. Like maybe one parent will show up consistently.
I was going to say that exact same thing. One parent may show emotion, the
other parent is not, or the other parent could even be like abusive, to that even extent. So the first thing I'm thinking of is that at least we know in the research that what predicts your child's success is if one adult shows up consistently for them. So if it can't be both parents, then you could still be that parent that shows up for your child. And the second thing is there are situations obviously where one parent could be, doesn't really connect with their child, doesn't really show up for them. The other parent does. What we know is that the situations where the parent shows up for the child, it could actually counteract what the child is going through negatively with the other parent. So it doesn't mean that your child, inshallah, they're not gonna, be messed up just because of that one parent. As long as they have another parent who's able to kind of like counteract, those negative interactions with positive interactions, then inshallah that should be okay. Ideally, obviously, we'd want the partner to be on the same page and to also show up for their children. So it really depends on the situation. If you're able to, talk to your partner, maybe if they read, tell them to read this book. If you're able to listen to like a podcast together or something, and where it kind of stresses the importance of showing up for your children. But it does take some deep work. Like your partner has to really want to do that, and they have to show up for themselves. They have to make sense of their own story. It takes work. So I would say maybe like every now and then bringing up this topic or showing them an article or showing them a book or whatever it is until they're more open to the idea. But in the end, you show up for your child. You do what you can while trying to, bring your partner in. But if they don't in the end, then what are you gonna do? You did what you could.
Yeah. One last question. What steps can a parent take to understanding their teenage child when the teen isn't opening up naturally to their parent?
Yeah, that's the number one question of life. I would say, so if your teenager isn't regularly opening up, I would say it's because I don't want to say it's your fault. It's not your fault, but it's because they don't feel like they can open up to you, right? It's because they don't feel comfortable or they don't feel like they can show you who they are. So I would say to try to have moments, starting from now, to have moments where you ask them. You don't have to keep asking them a million questions, but ask them questions and work on your response. Work on your response in terms of being empathetic and being not overreacting and not just being very kind and loving and comforting. Because if you accept your child for who they are, even if they've done things that are crazy or they don't open up, if you just accept them and they feel that acceptance towards you, then they're going to talk to you no matter what they feel. But if they feel like they're going to come to you and tell you something, and it could be something that they've done that's wrong. It could be something that's haram, that's completely wrong. And they know that you're automatically going to be like, what the heck? What are you serious? And you're going to completely shut them down and make them feel horrible. They're never going to come to you. So you just need to find moments of helping your child feel accepted by you. Loving moments, moments where they share something and you validate what they're saying, you validate their emotions, you offer love, you offer comfort. I think if you do that consistently, having those small moments, and then you start asking them more, bigger questions or deeper questions about their life, about what they're going through, and validating their responses, they're going to start to feel more comfortable, more trusting of telling you more things or telling you bigger things. So I don't know.
And it's scary, right? Because, I think about when you were talking about seeing your children on paper. I'm sure a lot of parents would love to see who their child is, but they're thinking about all the good things. It's scary to open yourself up, especially when your child is going through things that you may not necessarily think your child is going through, but maybe other children are. And it's very hard to open yourself up to accept all of those things and to take those things in and to not show your child that you aren't necessarily going to demean them or get angry at them or blow up. It's difficult.
It's 100% true. And that's also kind of why I mentioned that, even giving good labels, telling your child, oh, you're a good child. Oh, I know you're good. You're not like your friends. That's also going to make them not tell you anything, because your child is going to make mistakes, and they're going to make some pretty crazy mistakes. And if you're always telling them, oh, I know you're good. Oh, you're good. You're not like them. Then they're not going to feel comfortable. They're not going to want to tell you who they really are, because, they don't feel like they're doing good things. And that's going against the label that you created for them. So that's a very, very good point.
Okay, Jazakallah khair, Sister Sarah, for your important and impactful presentation. I liked that you gave clear and concise, actionable steps for showing up for your children. So I'd like to thank you for that. And thank you all for tuning in to our Family First Center's weekly webinar. Be sure to meet us here each week, where we'll be discussing a different topic every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.